I I just got going. It was a lot of fun to write. Once I got rolling on it, I couldn't stop writing now. I was having a ball. Um, it's my favorite book that I've ever written. Um, and so I hope people like it. Um, a Midwest kid, grew up in Michigan and Minnesota. Uh, I joined the Army when I was 17. Um, Went to university, got a commission as an officer, and then spent the next 30 years on active duty as an infantry officer. I think I spent 18 years abroad during that time. Got married, had a couple of kids. The kids are grown up. One's a paratrooper in Alaska, one's in the Air Force down in Florida. Um, at some point, I started writing books. I think it was just before COVID, and then COVID kind of kicked the writing career off because there wasn't much else to do during the lockdowns. So far, I've got seven published novels. Just finished a manuscript on the eighth book, which I'm hoping to get off to a publisher sometime here whenever the alpha readers get done with it and I finish up my final edits. But yeah, I retired from the Army in 2024. And then I don't know if you've seen Shawshank Redemption, but I'm institutionalized like Brooks. So I went back working for the Army as a civilian. And that's what I do during my daytime, my day job. Well, not right now. I'm furloughed, but that's okay. Gives me more time for writing.
And thank you for your service.
So thank you for your support.
So, what originally drew you into the military?
Too many war movies as a kid. That's probably about it. I was just fascinated with it. And I went off and joined. My little brother did the same thing, and he did a full career in the Air Force, and then he retired, and now he flies for United Airlines, and he's living his best life. Uh, but yeah, both of us we pursued careers in the military, had a ball, had a great time.
And so you mentioned that you have been writing, you've always had that interest ever since like junior high. You were trading with your friend, and that kind of got revived recently. And could you just tell us about your interest in writing?
Yeah, I was in a creative writing when I was in junior high. Even got selected to go to creative writing courses at a local community college, and I had a friend back then. We would collaborate, send stories to each other and critique each other. And I guess when I started working full time, it kind of dropped off. My creative interests, my creative pursuits, kind of took a back seat for a long, long time. Um, then about 20 years ago, I was a big John Ringo fan, still am, and old John, he was trying to put together an anthology in his, one of his universes, and I wrote a submission, and he accepted it, and got all excited, and then the anthology never took off, and it never got published. So that kind of sparked my interest, thinking, hey, maybe I can do this sort of thing. And then, but again, my creative writing kind of took a back seat, and then I think it was 6 years ago or so, my wife told me I needed to get a hobby. And one of my other friends, he was getting published, and he kind of reinforced it, like, hey, you should probably start writing books. So I said, okay, well, let me dabble a little bit. And I wrote a short story that ended up getting offered a contract for. And then I thought, well, heck, maybe I can do this stuff. And then I wrote my first novel, which ended up getting picked up by Eric Flint and his Ring of Fire Press. So I ended up writing a trilogy for Eric before he passed away, and that was it. I took off. I got all sorts of confidence that this was something I could do, and I think it was Canon Publishing offered me the opportunity to write some zombie apocalypse novels for them, which I did. Those became fairly popular. Um, so yeah, and I've been writing ever since. Guess the transition between my last career and my new one has kind of slowed my writing down a little bit, but I'm
Mm.
back in the saddle. as they say.
So I've stalked you a little bit on Amazon, and I see you actually have multiple series out. What was the one that got you started with your trilogies?
So it was my Ashes series. It was military science fiction. Um, okay, for any aspiring writers out there who haven't been published yet, I don't recommend trying to write a trilogy for your first, adventure in writing. Um, that's what I did. It was probably not the right move. Um, but yeah, that was my first one. I had, how should I put it? Everybody's first book is a little rough around the edges,
Mhm.
and mine was no exception. Of course, writing sequels to that, the sequels got progressively better, a lot better, I think. Um, but if people read the first book and it doesn't hook you, then they're not going to read the second or third one in your series. But yeah, that's how I got started. Did write a zombie apocalypse series. I'm still writing in that. That has gained a bit of popularity. Yeah, um, folks are begging me to keep writing in that one. Um, I will. I got to get back in the saddle with that one.
So what draws you to the craft of writing?
I don't know. I wanted to kind of put some ideas down in a story form at first, and then I discovered how unbelievably difficult writing is, and then but that sort of fits with my personality. I like a challenge. So I like writing because it's hard. Um, and it takes a lot of discipline. You gotta make yourself sit down and knock the book out. Then you gotta get in there and edit the thing, and then you gotta have people read it, and then you gotta have a thick skin and get this, substantive feedback because people are gonna tear you up when they read your work. But that's good. It makes you better. And then you got to go back and fix it. And then you got to get out there and find a publisher willing to offer you a contract. And then once that happens, then you got to get out there and hustle and sell that thing. I didn't know. I was under this impression that, man, when you find a publisher, you just give it to them and they're going to run with this. You don't have to worry about nothing after that. Nope. You got to become a salesman and you got to sell your book. And you got to spend a lot of time marketing and figuring out how to get people interested in it. Um, but that's part of the challenge. That's kind of why I like this whole thing. It's a lot of fun.
And what so I too agree that it is very difficult. It is a challenge, and I think I love that kind of need to kind of really sink your teeth into the difficulty.
Yeah.
How would you describe like your writing process? Like, do you need a lot of huge amount of time to block off? What do you like to do for your writing?
Um, Great question. So I need to spend some time thinking about what I'm going to write about. What really gets the creative juices flowing for me is going out on long walks. Of course, you start off the walk and you're thinking about the laundry list of things you got to do. Oh, I got to go to the store, I got to pick this up, or I got to go do this other project. And then after a while, your mind kind of starts to wander a little bit, and you start getting these ideas in your head, and so that will spark an idea from a story or a book. Um, and then I sit down and I do an outline. When I first started writing, I used to be one of the pantsers, where I just start going, but the stories would meander. There'd be no ending. It'd be, you know, I'd go off in some direction and never figure out how to end this thing. So I learned that, yeah, I have to outline. I have to, I do it in like a 3 act play, beginning, middle, and end. Before I start writing, I know the ending before I even know how the story's going to start. Um, I put it together, an outline and a 3 act play sort of format. And then I kind of break it down a little bit in each of the acts, gives me an idea for chapters a little bit. I don't get too involved because I do need to do a little bit of creative, let the muse speak for me a little bit. Um, and then I sit my butt down and start writing. And I will say, this is where the discipline part comes down. I say, okay, 5 days a week minimum, I'm going to sit down and write, and I'm going to write 1,000 words a day.
Mm.
And that'll take me, depending on how, much the muse is talking to me that day, it could take me 45 minutes. It might take me an hour and a half, but that's usually about an hour. So I'll spend about an hour a day, knock out 1,000 words. And, if all things go well, and they rarely do, it takes me about 3 or 4 months to rough in a manuscript.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I my record is 2 months for a full manuscript, 90,000 words. But that was during COVID lockdowns. I didn't have a whole lot else to going on, and I could knock out 2,000 words a day without too much problem.
Nice.
Yeah. And over time, I got a solid group of guys who have been terrific. They have agreed to be alpha readers, first readers for every single one of my manuscripts. And it's about 20 guys I lean on. Uh, and they read over my manuscripts. They give me direct feedback. And it's because it's a creative work and it's all subjective. So you're going to get feedback from different people who prefer different things and have different little quirks, which I find helpful. Um, and based on that feedback, I'll tweak the manuscript, and then I'll shop it around to a publisher. I get on social media. I don't have a huge social media following, but I have a modest one, and I start talking about the books. I start talking about the projects, and the more I talk about it, the more you try to get as much attention on the project as you can. And then, yeah, when release date comes, uh, I make big noise about that. The folks I do send out early reader copies, advanced reader copies, and I'll ask the people that have read those to put up reviews for me right on release day, which is helpful. When people look at your book on Amazon, if there's already reviews up, that helps sell books. So, yeah, that's kind of my process, more or less.
And you mentioned that you like to read histories. What kind of are there any authors that you particularly enjoy with that?
Oh gosh, I used to be a big Stephen Ambrose fan, um, because I think I may have mentioned it before. Like, people that write historical work are rarely good writers. So a lot of historical work is very dry, very academic, um, which is hard to read. Like, it's hard to get through that. So I prefer writers who can craft a story. They can talk about history like a fiction writer would. There's a story, they craft it, they tell it. There's an art to it. It's just writing. All writing isn't the same. Like, academic writing is one thing, and then there's writing reports for work. I was a speech writer at one point for a year. It was one of my jobs in the Army. That's a completely different discipline than fiction. Just you have to understand, you know, what you're writing in, what your genre is. So going back to the historical, work, I love reading history books, especially about military stuff. But man, it's tough to find a good author who's putting out something that's easy to get through, if that makes sense. I just hate reading dry stuff. It's like, reading the instructions for stereo. Or IKEA. It's tough.
That just data dump, this date, this, yeah, this,
Yeah,
that
it's
hill.
rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these history is about people. So, tell a story about people. Like, you, people are interesting. you know, write it that way. Um, but yeah, that's Ambrose was good about that. He would talk about, obviously his work. got turned into Band of Brothers and other things like that because he could take the historical narrative, the big picture stuff, and then weave in personal stories of real people doing real stuff and make it interesting. And I think that's a great way to do it. Maybe someday I'll write a book about a historical thing. I don't know. We'll
Ooh,
see.
nice. And so I took a peek in our server with battle drills, and
Mm.
I was just blown away by your opening line alone. It
Oh,
pissed freezing rain all over them, and the only thing louder than the chattering of their teeth was the occasional rolling thunderclap. And I just thought, oh my God, this sounds like a soldier.
yeah. I, I, I draw on some of my experiences
Yeah.
in the Army for this. I spent a lot of time in the infantry getting rained on and freezing and being hungry and not sleeping and doing all that. So that helps when you're writing stories like that. Easier to visualize it.
Yeah, and because you mentioned, you get thrown out of the story when someone doesn't have that military background, and so
Yeah, it's tough for me. I don't want to talk disparagingly about other people's work, but sometimes when you can tell an author has never been around that world or done a lot of research in it and they're just winging it and it feels very inauthentic and it pulls me out of the story.
mm.
Uh, but again, it's art, it's subjective. Other people might love it. Uh, Other people don't care, maybe, and get into the story anyway. That's fine.
Because Raconteur Press, we have a lot of military presence, and I love that. I'm a brat myself,
Oh, okay.
and I was talking to one of our veterans, and he was telling me about a scene he was writing that was kind of almost sort of venting about some of the red tape.
Mm.
And I thought that's probably going to ring true for a lot of people, but it's probably not going to be a very good scene. So, how do you police yourself from, telling the story versus maybe sort of falling into kind of a personal rant? How do you watch that?
Oh, that's a hard question. There's things I like to weave into these stories, kind of like teaching a class, like, hey, this is, a good way to do this, or this is something you should consider. And I do like to throw a little commentary in there sometimes. I like to rip on politicians all the time, and government bureaucrats. My last duty assignment, I worked with the State Department at an embassy, and man, I got an exposure to government bureaucrats like I never thought I would. Got Gave me a whole new appreciation for how much how much contempt I have for some of these people. Not all of them, obviously. There's some great patriots working in some of these government agencies, and then there's a lot of dreck. Um, so I try to weave some of that stuff in, um, but to your point, you got to make it entertaining, and it's got to. Somebody once said, if you're writing, uh, it's got to support the story. Like it just can't go off on a tangent and have no connection with the rest of it. So you try to make sure it all keeps things moving in the right direction, and you're not going off on one of your rants just that has no purpose. If your rant serves a purpose for the story, great, put it in there. But if it doesn't, you got to take it out. And that's where my alpha and beta readers help out a lot. Some of the guys will come back and go, "What the heck was this? Why is this important? Cut this crap out of there. Just delete it." And so it's good to have another set of eyes, many sets of eyes on the work, and listen to what they have to say. Um, but on that topic, I don't make changes based upon everybody's feedback, like because everybody's got an opinion on your work, and you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But if I get feedback from several people mentioning the same thing, I'll make a change immediately. But if some guy says, "Well, I didn't like the name of this character. I think the name sounds weird." Okay, that's your opinion. Got it. Thank you for your feedback. Anyway, now I'm going off on a tangent.
Well, we got plenty of time. We were about only about halfway point. And just to kind of pick your brain a little bit, I'm really curious what makes a scene to you? What does it have to have to be a scene?
Oh, gosh. I think for me, I mean, it's got to obviously be propelling the story forward. Um, and the scene, it's very organic with me. This is where the pantser comes in. I just start going, and I don't know. It's like it's something I don't put a lot of intentional thought into. But it is if I kind of picture it in my head like I would watching a TV show or a movie. I'm like, where would a good scene break be? How would I mix it up? So I guess when I'm doing like an action sequence in a chapter, I'll break it. I'll have a scene set from one character's point of view, and then I'll break and I'll pick it up in a different place with a different character's point of view. Say actions are happening, parallel to each other, but they're building towards the same climax. So I'll do scenes like that. I'll actions will be happening at the same time, different places with different people, all moving towards the same endpoint, and I'll break scenes up like that. Like this guy's, fighting in a spaceship, doing this thing. Scene break. Okay, there's this team of infantry inside a spaceship fighting, inside. Scene break. You know, the transports over here gearing up, doing, things like that. If that makes sense. Um, it's very organic with me. I'll be like, boy, it sounds like this would be a good place for a scene break, and let's shift point of view, or maybe launch forward in time a couple of weeks, or whatever. I I don't know that I go through much of a deliberate process. That's where it gets a little artsy for me. I just wherever it feels right, that's what I do. That's kind of how I do it. But again, it goes back to my outline. I will have that outline, and I'll basically have chapter ideas. I'll just like one sentence. That's the chapter, or less than a sentence, maybe 3 or 4 words, and I'll build a whole chapter off of that, um, and let the muse go. Whatever that little voice in my head starts saying, I just start tapping it out. That's probably not helpful for a lot of people. That's just how my brain works.
And so maybe even both as a reader and a writer, what do you like in characters? What are some things that draw you to characters? Maybe want to write them, maybe explore their viewpoints more. What do you like?
Imperfection,
Yes.
flawed characters. Uh, I hate perfect characters, particularly in my protagonists. Like they have to be human. Like there has to be something, some flaw with them. Like they're not as smart as everybody else, or they have a bad temper, or they're not very patient, or or they're bad in relationships. I like my latest manuscript. I wrote this protagonist. He's a raging alcoholic. Um, his wife left him. His second divorce. Stuff like that. But he's still the hero of the story, and he's holding things together. You know, he does well in the things he's interested in and he's passionate about, and then he's really bad at everything else. That's an example. I really get drawn to characters that feel real, um, that aren't some superhero. Just that perfect people don't exist, in my opinion. So I don't want to read about them, I guess. And my antagonists, because in most of my books, I have an antagonist, and I try to make them relatable,
Mhm.
um, almost sympathetic. Because you get this guy twirling his mustache and wants to take over the world, and just he's just straight evil to the core. You're like, well, That's not interesting either. It's more interesting when you have an antagonist who has rational thought, is intelligent, and has a reason for doing what they're doing. It might be evil and it might be wrong, but you understand the logic. You understand where they're coming from and why they're doing it. And in some twisted way, it makes sense, but they must be defeated. Uh, so yeah, that's kind of what I look for in characters. My supporting characters, um, I just I think about people that I've interacted with over time who are just interesting and they kind of inspire some of these supporting characters. And again, the quirkier and less perfect they are, the better, in my opinion. In one of my books, I had this supporting character who was the protagonist's best friend, and but he was a street thug. He's just a street brawler, growing up as a kid. And he had foul language all day long, smoked and drank, and womanized, and did all this stuff. But he was an interesting character. He was loyal, perfectly loyal to his best friend. Would do anything for him. But everybody else, he'd steal from them, and get in fist fights and all this other stuff. But I liked the character. I thought he was interesting. But yeah, that's what I kind of like in characters. I think um, you can't make them too flawed, or else the reader doesn't have any connection to them. But make them a little rough around the edges.
I like to think of that Oscar Wilde quote. I think it's Oscar Wilde when he was saying, "I might be lying in the gutter, but I'm looking up at the stars." I love those characters who,
Sure.
they're not perfect, but they're still reaching, no matter how feebly for something good. Do you kind of like to have that tension with the characters?
Yeah, and and the characters have to have an arc.
Yeah.
They have to grow, and they have to move in a direction. And the reader has to see that. So if you start them off, you know, perfect, how do you have a character arc when you start off with a perfect person or with few flaws? Um, you want to kind of have somebody that's a bit of a mess so that you have something to work with, so that they can grow as a person and that the reader can watch that growth throughout the story. So, yeah, I mean, you don't want, like I said, you don't want to make them unsympathetic,
Mm.
but you got to give them something to work on. Uh, yeah, that's how I look at it.
So what do you want battle drills to give your readers?
Oh, a rootin' tootin' good time. Um, I loved writing that story. And that was my COVID book that I wrote during lockdown, and I knocked it out in like 2 months, and I had a blast writing this thing. So, and it was inspired by a couple of, I grew up as a kid, reading Soldier of Fortune magazine, and thinking this mercenary thing was so cool. And there's a couple of movies that came out in the 70s, The Dogs of War and Wild Geese, about these mercenaries. And I think I sat down and watched Wild Geese while I was on lockdown, and it inspired this book. Um, so there are hints of that sort of inspiration in there, but obviously I didn't rip off the movie. No, I didn't do that, but it clearly inspired. I had some good friends in there. The first chapter of the book, I talk about Damian Hill and from Tasmania. Damian Hill is a real friend of mine. I was stationed in Australia for 5 years, and Damian is my friend from Tasmania, and he thought it was awesome that I talked a lot about Tasmania, as Tassie as they call it. But yeah, I started writing it. I got some inspiration from a couple of things, and I, I I just got going. It was a lot of fun to write. I just Once I got rolling on it, I couldn't stop writing now. I was having a ball. Um, it's my favorite book that I've ever written, um, and so I hope people like it.
And so
I hope
this
people
looks
like it as much as I did anyway.
I'm really excited. I've taken peeks in our server. I think it looks really amazing. And so this is part of your Fallen Empire series?
So it was part of Canon Publishing. It was originally uh, part of that universe. Um, I I wrote it independently. It's got very little connection to that universe.
Okay.
It had very little connection, and now it has none. I asked to have the rights released back to me. I got them. I scrubbed it, made sure there's no references to that universe anymore, because it was never really deeply embedded in that universe to begin with. It was just sort of an offshoot. It was kind of its own independent thing anyway. Um, so it wasn't really hard to scrub it to take the references from that universe out. It was actually just a couple of lines. Uh, but it helped give me an idea for, how I would build a mercenary company and how they would get out there and compete in this market. Well, in the wake of an interstellar war, and there's all these unemployed soldiers running around looking for work, and hey, they're all good at making war stuff, so let's build some companies and do war stuff. So yeah, I mean that's how it got rolling. But yeah, it's its own independent thing. It always kind of was, and I'm hoping if people like this one, I'd love to write a sequel for it. But we'll see how it goes.
And so how did you get together with Raconteur Press?
Um, so I was friends with a couple of people that work over there. It's one thing I learned later on in life is networking is an important thing. So it turns out I had a couple of friends that worked there. So I was chatting with one of them, and they said, "Hey, we haven't perhaps an opportunity for you over here." So I said, "Okay, sounds great. Love to work with the team." So here we are. And I'm excited about it. Super excited.
And so do you like to go to a lot of conventions? Do you like to interact with a lot of other writers?
Yeah, so I've been to a few. Um, I was my most recent one was RavenCon in Virginia last April, I think. Um, since I got a new job, it's been tough to try and get the time to go to do these things. Um, when I was between jobs, I went to a few more. I did Dragon Con a year ago. I was The reason I went to Dragon Con was I was a finalist for a Dragon Award for my second zombie novel in the horror category. So I was got my fingers crossed. I went there. I didn't win, but I was finalist, so I guess I got that feather to put in my cap. But it was a lot of fun. I've been to Liberty Con quite a few times. Great folks there. But yeah, I go when I can. And since I've been writing, I've been sitting on panels, which is really interesting. Fielding questions from fans, and I'm not super well known, so people don't know who I am. So most people don't know who I am. So I like getting out there in panels and kind of talking about my work a little bit. And people, when they get their curiosity piqued, they approach you after a panel and have a little discussion. And, you grow your fan base one or two people at a time, I guess. And that's how it goes.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
And what's some of the best feedback or advice you've gotten regarding your writing?
Um, as my old college roommate and best friend once said, get off your butt and start writing. That was probably the best advice. Stop talking about writing and do it. Um, that's probably the best piece of advice I ever received when it came to that.
Mm.
Um, the rest of it's been a lot of learning. It's just been a journey of learning. Uh, I, I, there's so much that you have to know when you get into this, and I did do a little homework um, when I started my second book. I didn't do a lot of homework writing my first manuscript. And when I when I looked at the original manuscript that I submitted, which got rejected, it deserved to be rejected. I mean, it was not structured the right way that a reader would want to read it. I thought I was being all art house and creative and cool, and it's like, no, don't over engineer this thing. You know, just there's a way of doing this. There's an art and a science to writing. Um, the science is understanding what the hero's journey is, and what a three act play is, or the other traditional ways to structure a story. Understanding what a protagonist and an antagonist is. That's all the science of it. And the art is actually weaving together characters that the reader wants to read about, to care about, and putting together situations that people think are interesting. And that's the art part. So you got to kind of mix the art and science and make something that folks like. Um, but yeah, the best piece of advice was get off your butt and just write. And the rest of it is just me doing homework on how to do it better and not to suck. That's and that's about it.
And how has your writing maybe shaped you? You know, working on these characters and these scenarios, have you noticed a change in yourself?
Yeah, a good one. Um, so when I started this, I was at the tail end of a 30-year Army career. And, you run around in those circles and that's your life. Like you hang out with other Army people and that's all you talk about is Army stuff, and work stuff, and, other people and stories about Army stuff. When I started writing, I entered a whole different world with different people that are talking about business and marketing and the creative process. And all of a sudden, I've been exposed to a whole different world, which really expanded my horizons in a really great way. It got me talking. And then, my Army buddies, they found out I was getting published and they're curious and they're asking about this. And it turns out there's a lot of closet wannabe writers in the military uh, that never stepped out into the light because they didn't think they could do it. So since I've been doing it and I've been very open about it, a lot of my old buddies have come out of the woodwork and have asked for advice and have started writing themselves, and which is really neat to see. And I started this little support network for my crew. Like whatever I can do to help coach and mentor uh, people in my little sphere. I do what I can, um, and that's been fun too. Just helping people get into it. And but one thing that military guys really hate about writing is getting out and marketing and selling their books.
Mm.
Like it's something that they're very uncomfortable with. I was very uncomfortable with it at first, and then I realized it's like a tree falling in the forest. Nobody's there to hear it. Did it make a sound? Well, if you wrote a book and nobody's heard about it, what's the point? So you got to get out there and you got to hustle and you got to market and sell the book and kind of, you know, let people know it's out there. I had no idea so many of us were interested in writing until I came out of the closet, if you will, and started talking about my writing. And a lot of my former Army buddies, approached me and said, "Hey, I was thinking about writing a book. How do you do it?" And then that sort of grew into me, teaching, coaching, mentoring folks through the process. And there's been quite a few of them now that have written some books and are trying to get published. So it's been fun.
I get to ask my favorite question now, which is,
Oh, goodness.
what have I not asked you that you would like to talk about?
Oh, wow. So, this journey of writing. Like I said, I started it off, my wife, and she said I needed a hobby, and and my buddy, he was into it, and I didn't know what I was doing when I started off, and I wrote this manuscript that was really wonky. But then I got some great feedback from Eric Flint's team over there and turned it into something readable. Um, but it's just been a lot of, you know, YouTube tutorials on writing and talking to other writers and trying to figure out how this whole thing works. And then talking to folks in the industry, um, like yourself and, other publishers and other editors and getting ideas about how not just the writing process works, but the publishing industry works, because I don't understand a lot about that. I thought I did, but the more I peeled the onion on that, the realization set in that I really am ignorant about this whole process as far as how the industry operates and how to run a company like that. Not that I'm interested in starting my own publishing company. That is no way am I interested in doing that. That's pretty difficult. That's hard work, and that's not something I want to dive into. Which is funny because I was helping out with another publisher for a little while, and I ended up sitting on a panel at RavenCon about small press publishing and running those businesses. So I sat on a panel with all these other people that were either running their own companies or were senior, members of their, and holy moly, it was like there is so much I don't know about this industry. Um, and I'm learning new stuff every day, but golly, there's a lot to it. Um, I I could spend years, and I'd still be just scratching the surface. Um, but it's the more you know about it, the more it helps you as a writer and giving the publisher what they need and working with editors and giving the editors what they need. And then, the help and the assistance it gives you with marketing and trying to sell the book. That's all been very helpful. Um, One of the most important things from a marketing perspective is having a social media presence and interacting with people, and that can be tough, especially if you're an introvert like myself, and you're not one of these people that gets a charge out of running in the room and working the room and talking to a million people. And so it's draining. It takes a lot of energy. For me personally, I invest the time and the energy. Again, it goes back to this whole thing being very challenging, and I like a challenge. But um, but the marketing is the secret sauce that everybody's still looking for. If that's the one thing everybody in the industry talks about is how do you get that marketing? Uh, what's the magic? How do you reach the readers? And nobody seems to have figured that out. I don't even think the big five have figured it out. The articles I keep reading are, people are just out there fishing. They're trying different things, and if they get a bite, they get a bite. If they don't, it is what it is. Um, so that's been fun in a sarcastic way, trying to figure out how to get out there and get readers to even pay attention to you.
Mm.
Um, I think one thing that's been pretty cool is, you see how many followers you have on Amazon. That's helpful because then there's X number of people that are interested enough in your writing that they want to be notified when you have a new book coming out, and there's a reasonable chance that they might buy your book. So that's pretty neat. But Amazon is pretty opaque in how they share their marketing, you know, their secrets. They don't let them out. They keep those close to their vest. They hold them close to the vest. So, you know, everybody's got these ideas about how to do it. Everybody's still out there fighting the good fight, but I don't think anybody's cracked the code on it yet. But yeah, the marketing bit, that's been the toughest thing, but I think that's a universal experience for everybody. But I keep trying. But all in all, yeah, the whole journey's been interesting, and it's not over. I still I got a long way to go, so I'm just going to keep up the slog. We'll get there someday, maybe.
And what hard lessons have you learned that you like to pass on to aspiring writers?
Um, you gotta get out there and get a social media presence.
Mm.
That's been one of the hardest things for some of the guys that I talk to. It's mostly guys. It's just what my circle is. A lot of them, they want to write a book or they did write a book. And then I'm like, okay, now you got to get out there and hustle it. And they're like, that sounds like something I don't want to do. Well, I'm like, well, then nobody's going to read your book. Sorry. I love you guys, but unless you're willing to put yourself out there and, uh, and hustle this thing a little bit, nobody's going to read it. I mean, your mom might read it, and your wife might read it, but that's going to be it. Which, sadly, I understand that's what 98% of authors end up, doing. They sell less than 50 books,
Mm.
and that's sad because there's a lot of work and people put them, their heart and soul into these things, and then nobody picks them up. So, yeah, you got to get out there. Um, so yeah, I guess the piece of advice is you got to build a social media presence. You got to get out there and market these things. And as unsavory as that sounds to some of my friends, you got to do it if you want anybody to read what you wrote.
It's almost like the writing is the fun part, and then you got to do the dance afterwards to kind of distribute it.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's yeah. Like I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I tell people, the writing is the easy part. It's the selling the book that's the hard part. And you spend a lot, months writing a book and you go through the editing process and you go through that manuscript so many times you're sick and tired of looking at it. You'd rather do anything else than look at your work again. And then you finally get a release date out there. And then now the real work begins. Getting somebody to know it even exists. And then taking the next step, getting them to buy it, you know, and that's tough, really tough. But I'm working on it. We'll see.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to see battle drills and especially anything that comes after as well. Do you see this as maybe being like a trilogy or a two-book series or?
Yeah, when I wrote it in the first place, I was hoping I could write 5 or 6 books in a series on this thing. Um, and I mean, it's written as a standalone, but the ending is open that you can build this universe out, flesh it out, this all day long. So that was my hope. Um, but when it was in its first edition, it just didn't sell that many copies. So I walked away from the project disappointed because I love the story. Again, it's my favorite book that I've written. Um, and I wanted so badly to write sequels for it, but it just didn't go anywhere. So I'm hoping with this second edition, this re-release, it does better because I really want to write another one in the universe. I'm excited about it. For any folks out there that are watching this, please check out the book. I like the book, but I'm biased. I think it's worth your time. If you're into military adventure or science fiction, I think it's going to scratch that itch for you. Uh, Give it a look.
Shane, thank you so much. It's wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.